Can you hear me? Okay, I'm just observer, so I'll go away, leave you in. Thank you.
Hey, Paul. Hi, Melissa.
Hello.
Hi, Bonnie. Nice to see you.
Good to see you.
Hi, Paul. Nice to see you.
Good to see you too.
Say, Paul, do you remember that line in Night at the Museum where he's in the elevator being chased by a dinosaur and closes the elevator door and says, "This is so not worth $10 an hour."
I don't remember, but it sounds familiar.
I'm thinking of you when I'm thinking of that.
Well, it's 20 and
Yeah, well, yeah, but still, I
Hey.
had to quote the movie, you know.
I am multitasking. I've got the NBA, the college basketball game on right here.
Awesome.
So I'm good.
Well, good. Well, I'm so glad because, you know, if you had to listen to everything that goes on at this meeting, you might resign.
No, no. I'm committed, or I should be, either one.
Yes, yes.
It actually gives me a little break too from my kids.
Amen to that.
All right, yeah.
My girls just took them to drive by Santa, so that works out.
Nice. I didn't even know they had a drive-by Santa.
It's in Chisholm, so we're in Hibbing, and my stepfather-in-law works for the city, so my mother-in-law messaged me and goes, "Hey, you know, bring the kids?" I'm like, "I have to work." Ashley, Taylor, because they're 17, almost 18 and 12, and then I got a 4 and a 3-year-old.
Oh, wow.
And then I have a 22-year-old. Yeah, so I'm like, take them. You're watching them anyways. They're easier to contain in a car.
Yes, that's true. We thought that was, I mean, if COVID's kind of, I don't know, if anything's good about COVID, and we still haven't gone to the, oh, what's that light thing that we have here?
Bentleyville.
Yes, Bentleyville. But we saw that it was drive-through this year, and I thought that was a really great idea. It is so cold down there.
Yeah.
I thought that was actually a good idea to make it drive-through.
We would think about that, but it's such a long trip with little
Yes.
kids to Duluth and then back without trying to stay away from any public restrooms or anything. So
Yeah.
we have a nice city hall light show that I take them to. It's within walking distance of our house here in Hibbing. So city hall is pretty decorated here.
That definitely works.
Oh, Patty, you're on mute. Hold on, let me unmute you. No, I can't do it. There you go.
Okay, I was gonna say they tell you not to do Bentleyville on the weekends because the
Okay,
lines
no.
are really long.
We've seen lines. Last year we saw lines down I-35.
Yeah, if my daughter's gone, but she's gone during the week and it's gone really well, really very quickly. But weekends, I understand it can be like 2 miles out. So
Oh, wow.
yeah. Oh, my dogs are playing now. I'm gonna go lock my dogs in the bedroom because they'll start barking for sure.
Okay.
Come on, come on.
Hey, Paul, can you change Clay's Clay Sitch, he's right now on, but it's only his phone number. The one that ends in
Sure.
the one that ends in 5005. That's Clay Sitch, or Clay and Annie, I should say. Annie's very important also.
There you go.
Perfect.
And then who is this RW?
That's Richard Wennis.
Okay. There he is.
Sorry for the really obnoxious close-up. I'll try not to do that again.
Big group tonight.
Yeah, no kidding. There's still
What's
3
going on?
minutes.
What is there, a meeting tonight or what?
I get notifications when people log in, and somebody logged in at 4.
Whoa.
And
Testing.
before-
Wow,
the last meeting, someone tried at 10 in the morning.
wow.
I'm sure they're just testing things out. It happens a lot. Oh, I gotta add it. I got busy talking to you guys, and there's people waiting to get in.
Oh, there's Kathy.
That's why.
Hi, Jeff.
Hi.
Oh, I printed off the minutes and then I forgot to go get them.
Hey, Mike, we're looking at your belly. There you go.
So Paul, the one that says iPad is Jeff and Barbara. Oh, there we go. Okay. All right.
Where's your brother?
Bottom,
Yep.
yeah, the belly.
What do you need? Just we hand me that thing. That would work.
Why am I not in the meeting now?
We're gonna try.
I'm just moving the cursor down to see who else is.
Hear me?
Yep.
There I go.
There you go. Okay, excellent. Okay.
Oh, hey, Greg.
Paul.
For some reason, you're not showing up in picture. So Greg's is the
Yep.
number that ends in 7991. Paul.
I can see Greg.
Yeah, it says Grace. My with all the
Oh,
online work,
So
my
yeah,
daughter's name comes up.
you have 2
Oh, there you are.
entries.
Okay, yeah, that's multiple.
That's fine.
Okay.
I got a twofer going there. Great.
1 audio, 1 video.
Oh, it's,
Yeah, I called in separate.
that's,
Well, good evening, Paul. How many people I heard said like 19? What's
Yeah,
the
we got
tally
some
on
more
the
coming
call?
in too.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll wait for you to confirm. That looks like we got everybody that's trying to get in this evening.
Yep, there's nobody else waiting.
Okay. All right. Let me just scan the board here, kind of get a general sense. Okay, great. Well, let's go ahead and kick it off. Appreciate everybody taking the time this evening to get on online together. There's been some additional information circulated, both just the team circulating on the broad distribution list, information of a variety of sorts, and then there's been some information posted that refers to the assignments taken last time we gathered, as well as an agenda circulated with the intent to kind of keep us on task and walk through a good portion of this. It's possible in light of how much material we have that we might not cover it all. Excuse me, but that's okay. I expected at least we'd have a couple meetings of people reporting back out. So we'll do what we can this evening, and then we have another meeting scheduled for next Monday, which will be the last of the year. So with that, we got a little bit of housekeeping to do right off the get-go. Was made aware we really should have the minutes made mention of, and anybody has any concerns of anything that isn't reflected or wants to comment, to do so. Otherwise, we would basically look to have them approved. Because we've had two gatherings, there are two different copies out there, one for December 7th and one for December 10th. So I don't know, hopefully everybody had a chance to look at these again. Melissa's been posting quite a bit out there, and it's readily available on the township site. So I'm going to go ahead and motion that we approve, starting with December 7th, unless there are questions within the team. Hearing not, we have a second.
Hang on. There's Ann Sitch's last name is spelled wrong. Or there's a space.
Okay, yeah, on the header. Okay, and then there's one other typo of sorts. So yeah, you're right, Lynn. We can go ahead and update the header on that. So that's something that we can carry over for both of them. There's probably a quick spell check on a couple other items that I circled that I can pass back on to Bonnie. Is there any content-related concerns with what's reflected on December 7th? Okay, if not, approve recognizing we're going to update any typos. Got a second on that?
I'll second it.
Thanks. Those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, so we'll go ahead and I'll follow up with Bonnie, and we'll just correct a couple items there and have that posted as approved. Switching to December 10th, again, aside from a typo or format change that we may make, is there any concerns or comments relative to December 10th minutes? Okay, hearing none. Let's go ahead and vote. Is there anybody's, anyone want to second the vote on the minutes for the 10th?
I'll second it.
Aye.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, again, Melissa and I and Bonnie will follow up on those, and we'll get those out as completed per the process. So, great, a little bit of housekeeping there. The second item on the agenda, I had sent out, again, there's been an ongoing distribution of information with the email group that we have. And I think that's fine. I mean, it's the best way to get it out there. I've heard comments about being concerned about things being censored or not, so I don't want to stand in the way of information that people discover being circulated. We do need to find a place for it in terms of it being relevant in one area of what we're doing or another, but I think the general informational distribution is just easier if we don't try to discern what's pertinent and what's not. That in itself is a level of effort. But I did want to ask whether anybody else has any questions of what we covered relative to the way the segments were broken out. I gave a little bit of a description of what I thought would help with some of the preparation that we're going through. So I just wanted to offer that up in case there was any comments or questions on that approach. Okay, not hearing any. We'll just continue on. So let's jump into number 3 then. So clearly it's not going to be a once and done, in terms of reviewing this information, but I really appreciated the people that did take on the assignments and took time and are taking time to look into this. We're going to use that information directly as well as follow up as needed. I did reflect on the agenda, a couple of comments there under notes, just to give everybody a heads up. The first one is the share drive again and what Melissa's doing. So those will continue to be posted on the share drive. So ease of access and, some version control and so forth. We're going to cover some this evening. We'll look to cover likely a portion of them next Monday, and as needed, we'll cover them at yet a future meeting to go through them first round. So again, some people are listed already, and I did hear back that Chris Bell is not feeling well, so he won't be sharing this evening. So we've got a little bit of a reduced list there already. And then the last comment might be the most pertinent in that we really want to hear out the people that have spent some time taking responsibility and gathering information. I do expect there likely is going to be some Q&A relative to any one of the particular sections that we cover tonight or in the future. But I would ask if you have actual additional insight or specific information that you believe should be added to that particular segment, so that we factor in maybe something you're pulling elsewhere or some insight you have, that be done in writing. I think it's fine to share some general insight tonight and again go through a Q&A, but in order for us to really be able to draw from that information in the future, it's going to be greatly benefited if it's documented. So just make a note of that. We are looking for what people can share, and again, the best form is to associate it with how we've segmented the work up to this point at least, and as well as have it in writing so we can draw from it, circulate it, and so forth. Follow up on it as needed and like. So just a couple of items there. With that, we're ready to jump into just walking through these. And again, we'll cover as many as we think we can get done and still leave time for a little bit of a wrap up. So if we get more involved in discussion, that's value add. That's all great. And if we find we move them more quickly, we will go through all of them. I don't think there's any pressure to complete them tonight. On the other hand, no harm in walking through them and then working on fresh ones come next Monday. So, which either is the case, we just want to make sure we provide time to have the people that have done this to present, and again, a chance for Q&A. So, with that, I'll turn it over to you, Patty.
Oh, okay. Well, it'll be kind of boring, but basically I'll probably just pretty much read everything. Intent and purpose. Both Geneson and St. Louis County state the purpose. The goal is to protect the health, safety, and general welfare of the inhabitants. St. Louis County goes further by first stating the purpose is to protect, preserve, and enhance the quality of the lakes, rivers, forests, wetlands, natural landforms, open spaces for future generations. The state also stressed water and the importance of protecting that shoreland and all those types of things. Both states emphasize the importance of protecting water quality. Limitations of number of pits and permits. Only Geneson limits the number of gravel pits or density of gravel pits, minimize the cumulative impact for a specific area of the township. And I quote, this is what's in their ordinance. Their township is split into 6 different zones, and the maximum number of conditional use permits for private gravel pits, the maximum of 3 conditional use permits for private gravel pit operations in any one zone. So they can only have 3 in a zone. The maximum number of conditional use permits for private gravel pit operations in the whole entire township is 12. Minimum standards. In general, Geneson and St. Louis County have very similar ordinances. In several cases, however, Geneson standards are more detailed. They go further than St. Louis County and are stricter than St. Louis County. Both Geneson and St. Louis County state that no permit shall be issued to an owner and or operator if they own an existing pit that hasn't been reclaimed. Geneson says no owner and or operator may receive a conditional use permit for gravel mining for a new or expanded operation in an existing permitted, if an existing permitted pit owned or operated by the applicant remains inactive or unclaimed. So and then St. Louis County, that's the first thing they say. No permit shall be issued to an operator owner who has not reclaimed a previously approved extractive use or is in violation of the conditions of their permit. St. Louis County clearly does not enforce this ordinance. It's the first thing they have up. Shoreland standards. Geneson does not allow extractive use cup applications for the shoreland areas according to DNR standards. And those standards are that nothing can be within 1,000 feet of a lake or and 3,000 feet of a river. St. Louis County has no such standard. Environmental assessment worksheets. Geneson requires one to get a new cup or to expand into an adjacent parcel of land. St. Louis County makes no mention of an environmental assessment worksheet in their requirements, nothing. Excavation of water tables. Geneson states that excavation below the water table is permitted with appropriate state permits, provided there is no adverse impact upon the quality of nearby surface water or well. So it has to be checked out ahead of time. St. Louis County only mentions this as a question in their permit application. And the question is, what is the depth of groundwater before excavation? You are not required to have an answer or knowledge of this in order to get the permit. So St. Louis County doesn't, you don't have to have the information. Portable hot mix plants. In Geneson, they are permitted if no residence is located within 1,000 feet of the pit and the facility is limited to being in the pit 2 working days per 1,000 tons hot mix. I don't understand all that. St. Louis County allows them with a setback of a minimum of 300 feet from all residential principal dwellings. So there's a big difference in how close they can be with Geneson and St. Louis County. The setback in St. Louis County of 300 feet can be waived with written permission by the adjoining property owner. Dust control. Here again, this is where St. Louis County is just kind of broad and general, and Geneson goes into more detail. St. Louis County states dust control measures shall be implemented as necessary from the processing site to the nearest paved road. Geneson is more specific. They say dust control measures shall be utilized on non-paved routes in accordance with the policy of the local road authority. Dust control measures shall take place within the pit itself if dust leaves the area and regularly affects adjacent residential properties. So they're a bit stronger. Storage piles of recyclable asphalt and concrete. In Geneson, they have to be stored in an area that cannot be seen from any public land. St. Louis County has no such provision. Erosion. This is another one where St. Louis County gives kind of a broad statement. Geneson goes into more detail. St. Louis County simply states that all I'm having trouble with that word, extractive uses shall take measures to control erosion and runoff that has the potential to damage adjacent land. Geneson takes it further. Borough pits shall take measures to control erosion that has the potential to damage adjacent land and control sediment that has the potential to leave the site. The access road shall be designed in a manner that minimizes erosion. Erosion and sediment control measures shall conform to the Soil Conservation Service Field Office Technical Guide or that of the Minnesota Department of Transportation. The zoning officers shall approve all erosion and sediment control measures. So they look into it. The owner or operator shall maintain all such practices until the pit area is permanently stabilized or reclaimed. And the last thing we'll bring up are berms, appearance from roadways. St. Louis County states adequate vegetative screen shall be required to screen the operation from ordinary public view, and if it's not sufficient, the director may require the placement of a fence or berm. In Geneson, they require a berm when a gravel pit is adjacent to a public road. It goes into detail then about what is required for the berm. So that's kind of all I have.
Well, let me jump in, and we can open to the broader audience too. Appreciate you sharing that, Patty. So one of the things that probably many of us have made mention of or noticed, and I'm going to give a broad statement, and then it does come up as we weave through other people's material as well, is that the county has multiple criteria that went into the approval denial of a CUP, 4 main items. And again, this is a little bit my view, right? But I think it's an overlay of what we see. And that is, the first one really is fairly objective. It deals with the conformance of land use and the comprehensive plan. That seems to be the strongest basis they've used. It's the only facts-based portion of what I saw shared prior. So it seems as though it had an awful huge part as to how they approved or rejected CUPs. But the others are pretty subjective. And so when I have heard you share, I've read prior, with Geneson as an example, maybe we'll come across others as well, where more specifics are provided. I think it helps to take some of the subjectivity out, because it's hard for me to really understand how we would take the subjectivity out of the latter ones unless there are metrics of sorts that need to be considered that might be either more explicit or more restrictive, but they're in all cases clear. So I think that's what I've seen in a lot of what has related to the numerical values and some of the specifics. I do believe on the environmental assessment that there is an obligation on the county if it's greater than 40 acres. There is a point at which it's a threshold, but you're right, Patty. The ordinance, at least the information through Geneson, is it's an obligation, I think, of all CUPs versus only those of a certain size. And that does touch on, again, I think, doing a little more research on the part of the organizations looking to get the approval. And then the last thing I had is you did reference the erosion and sediment controls measures as it relates to the Soil Conservation Service field guide or technical guide. That might be a good source to pull. I guess I'd be interested whether you pull it or we pull it elsewhere, but what really is in that guide, since it is, again, it's a reference, but I don't know to what extent any of us have looked at it specifically. But I think that would be of value too.
I can find that and post that for you, Greg.
Yeah, I mean, anytime we have a reference, particularly if it comes to give us additional clarity, in the end, I think we should, again, try to be as facts-based as possible, and objective as possible. And the more we can understand and reference other sources that people have brought up or have themselves referenced, I think the more solid our overall report's going to look. But okay, appreciate all that. Anything else for this section? Any questions for Patty or any other comments that people would like to share?
Yeah, Greg. So I will say I live next to the Durfee pit, and not so much for me, but for Jock Finner, he's always talking about the dust control. So the county only cares about if the road is dusted, but that pit blows over just a ton of dust right into their house. So if their windows are open, they get it right into their house. Their vehicles are always having to get washed because they're covered in dust. So the fact that the county or the Geneson says that dust control measure will be taken within the pit itself to protect residential properties is actually a really big deal. That does affect our neighbors. So that is something that is important.
Okay.
Well,
And
also the road,
yeah.
it talks about the road. If you notice that road that comes out of the pit is caked in dirt. And what I'm gathering from Geneson is they can't do that. They've got to fix that coming out of the pit.
Yeah, it's good to point out because again, there's value in sharing, and we're going to get down to boiling this to, again, something report format. But as I see it, the material differences, whether it be from the Geneson example or others that we come across, that again tie back to the main mission. And again, that's whether there's sufficient regulations to protect the residents is really what we're going to want to I believe see. So let's just take hypothetically, Patty might have brought up maybe 15 differences or 10 differences, whatever it is. We may find that a subset that are really important and we think are material enough to make mention of, and clearly it could be setback, it could be dust control, it could be some other aspect. But again, I like the metrics that give us something that's more objective based. I like the specificity because it gives us, I think, an opportunity to be clear on all parties, whether it be the residents or the pit owners. And I like the fact that some of these are stand out more, be more material than others, and that's going to allow us to probably have a more focused report. But that's just my read of how this comes across. So,
I have a
anything else for?
comment. I have a comment
Liz.
on the dust control and the dirt on the road. As far as Veely's pit, I mean, we used to live like 2 blocks from there, and there was always that on the road. So Geneson's not perfect as far as zoning their pits and watching them, just so you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, we are going to hit things numerous times, I'm sure. A precursor to a lot of what's going on here, it's led to this is, you know, whether there's been enforcement and we have to get into what that obligation is on part of a township, so that we walk into this eyes wide open. But appreciate you sharing that, Lynn. Okay. If nothing else, we'll go ahead and continue forward. The next one, Bruce and Bonnie, permits and interim use for gravel pits.
Yes, permitted borrow pits, Geneson, I said refer to zoning ordinance 10105C. I can read that, Greg. It's a long read. It's on page 60 and 61 of Geneson's ordinance, and it's pretty wordy. That's why I just said refer to that zoning.
Yeah, I don't feel there's a need to read them, but I do think you should share it, you know, what, maybe a summary so that people understand why you pulled that out, or however you'd like to do it, Bruce. We're not trying to require you to go into just a verbatim read of some other source.
Yeah, the following borrow pit permit shall be available in the town of Geneson: existing pre-ordinance pits, limited duration public work pits, and general purpose pits. And all permits shall be recorded in such a manner that all adjacent property owners will be notified of the existence of a pit. A couple maybe things to include with that would be, for pits that have a single season permit, crushing shall be limited to 45 calendar days, and hauling may continue until completion of the project for which the pit was authorized, and the hot mix operation may continue for 2 working days for each 1,000 tons of mix produced in the time of hot mix plant startup. If the proposed borrow pit is located on a road closed for construction, hours and days of operation may be extended as specified in the conditional use permit. And I didn't find any information on permitted borrow pits in St. Louis County Ordinance number 62. Permit required for Geneson. A cup is required for all types of borrow pits. The county, a cup is not required for public work projects. That's a class 1 permit. Geneson, their concern in 10105D2G of the cumulative impact of borrow pits in the area. And there's no mention of cumulative impact in the county's ordinance. Geneson, the Planning Commission approved the borrow pit with conditions including limiting the years the permit is valid and conditions that mitigate problems relating to pit operation. With the county, there's no mention of these conditions. Geneson, conditional uses and standards. There's an application request. And the county is not as strict in standards or application requirements. Geneson, the Planning Committee review and recommendations. The town board action and decision criteria. The town board shall not approve a cup unless it shall find that the establishment, maintenance, and operation of the use, number 1, will not be detrimental to the public health, safety, morals, or general welfare. Number 2, will not cause undue traffic congestion or hazards. and will not result in an on-street parking shortage. Number 3, will not be injurious to the use and enjoyment or result in a decrease in value of other property in the area. Number 4, will not impede the orderly development of other property in the area. Number 5, will not impose excessive burden on parks, utilities, and other public facilities and services. And number 6 is consistent with the town comprehensive plan. Special considerations for borrow pits. In addition to all applicable considerations noted above, the town board shall not approve an application for a borrow pit without making findings that the proposed pit meets all the standards and requirements set forth in section 10-105 of this ordinance. They have quite an extensive tag along on 10-105. That's quite additional requirements. The county conditional uses, general criteria and requirements. A conditional use permit may be granted only if the following findings can be made. The use conforms to the land use or comprehensive plan of the county, if any. Number 2, the use is compatible with the existing neighborhood. Number 3, the use will not impede the normal and orderly development and improvement in the surrounding area of uses permitted by right in the zone district. Number 4, the location and character of the proposed use is considered to be consistent with a desirable pattern of development for the area. And number 5, when in the opinion of the Planning Commission, a conditional use permit may result in a material adverse effect on the environment, the applicant may be requested by the Planning Commission to demonstrate the nature and extent of the effect. And in Ganeson's ordinance under 10-112A10, an environmental assessment worksheet must be completed for all new CUP applications. Under permit revocation, Ganeson permits may be revoked in accordance with procedures set forth in their ordinance. The county no land use permit will be issued until the conditions stated in the approval are implemented by the applicant. Interim uses is the definition of an interim use is to allow a temporary use of property until a particular date, until the occurrence of a particular event, or until zoning regulations no longer permit it. The designation of the use and property upon which it is located is changed to a permitted or conditioned use within the restrictive zone district. The use has been discontinued for a minimum of 1 year. And with the county, the two, I just have referred to 8.3 interim uses.
Yeah.
The 2 previously listed conditions of Ganesha Township are not listed in the county's ordinance. And under Minnesota State Statutes 2020 93.481, under permit to mine, that really referred to taconite, metal, and peat operations. There was no inference or mention to borrow pits.
Thanks, Bruce. Again, I've got a few things I'll start with, and others can weigh in if they have questions or comments. One of the things that did strike me when I looked at the Ganesha material was this issue that you started with early on about the cumulative impact. And they've done kind of a creative way of setting like segments or zones, and then numerically again, putting some constraint on the amount of activity for borrow pits. Again, I think whether that's the right way or not, it is more objective. Is anybody on the call had any dialogue with anybody in Ganesha about, you know, what drove them to that type of an approach? Because it seems relatively unique to carve up like a checkerboard, but clearly it's intended to limit, as they say, and you reflected here, Bruce, the cumulative impact. Has anybody talked with Ganesha about the basis of that approach?
Yeah, so basically what it is you can't get a new pit until the previous pits have been reclaimed. So it's basically it really puts pressure on old, pits that are empty, that are no more gravel, to make them reclaim, because you cannot get another gravel pit until they fix their pits. So it puts more pressure on other companies to fix their stuff. So it also helps with the land, the property values and such, because you're going to have better use of the land once it's reclaimed. So it just puts better pressure on the gravel pit owners to make them reclaim, and if they don't, then that area is stuck with their pit that's not being used. So
We looked at an old map of Friedenberg, and it was divided into zones as well. Residential zones, commercial zones, waterfront zones, residential zones. And so the pits were zoned in that zone. I believe it was 4. Residences were zone 1, and any water issues were zone 3. So the pits were their own zone, and so were other commercial endeavors.
Bonnie, if Jason doesn't cover that, he's not on the queue for today. I don't know if Jason's on a call, but I think that sounds interesting. I think that information you might want to share with him, or have available to share, later when we do go through that section of zoning, description and so on.
Say, Greg,
Yes.
that info she's talking about came from the comprehensive plan for St. Louis County, Town of Friedenberg, November 8th, 1984. That's where that map came from.
That was the last map. There are like 3 maps in there, and then this one that I'm talking about was the last updated map.
Okay. Thank you. Well, clearly, that's again, I'm trying to draw out some stuff I think is ultimately going to show back up, because it's either relatively unique line of thinking, or it's more specific and therefore more objective. When you went through, Bruce, the comparative of what goes into the committee review, they're fairly similar. Again, there's some clear differences. And so I do think there's going to be some discussion brought up at some point about the financial side of this. I've got something that Mark had shared at our last call, having an interest of pursuing. I think he and Lynn have been in dialogue. So I think it's going to come up a little bit about some of the financials, which might relate to property value or other aspects as well. And then the township comprehensive plan is actually something that Deb Roach has taken on. Okay, back to the group. Any other questions or comments about first pass through this area, this subject?
Yeah, can I get a definition of what a borrow pit is?
We have that.
Through county or through Geneson? Now, I'm looking at the county regs here, and it says a borrow pit is land use involving excavation or digging of material for use as fill at another site. A permit is required whenever there is borrow material for sale.
What's the source on that, Dan?
When St. Louis County permitting page, borrow pits, gravel. All you have to do is St. Louis County government, borrow pits, gravel pits. The first page for the application, it says a permit is required whenever there is borrow material for sale in St. Louis County. Now in Geneson, a permit is required whenever you dig a hole, probably. I'm not sure. I haven't really looked at their ordinance, but for the county, it says whenever there is borrow material for sale. Otherwise, you can use all the material on your property basically to do whatever you want with, because it's your property, it's private land. And the only time you need a borrow permit is to send it down the road for sale. That's under the county regs,
That makes sense.
okay? So, so what's the difference between county and Geneson? What does Geneson say for what a borrow permit is? When is a borrow permit required in Geneson? I guess is my question.
It can't be any less restricted than the county. So if the county says it's for sale and they don't specify, then that would be the same thing.
Okay,
Does that make sense?
yeah, that makes sense. I just wanted to clarify that, that's all.
Yeah, I think, Dan, what I think I'm hearing, not necessarily specific to that, but what I'm hearing in that question is because we're leaning fairly heavily on Geneson as a example in contrast to the county, Geneson being our neighbor, Geneson being a township. You know, if we start extracting the differences, and again, I think the ones that are material are what we need to stress. But you know, I think what I'm hearing is there may be cases where Geneson maybe has gone farther than we may believe to be necessary. So maybe we'll find some of those things where the county has aspects of what they have in their ordinance that is sufficient, and Geneson might have stepped a bit further than maybe people on this committee might think to be necessary. But
Right, so we can adopt an ordinance, and it's perfectly within the township's right to, you know, not take all the ordinances back. We can adopt gravel pits for now, and then we can decide how the junkyards are working, and then we can decide how where people put their houses, and we can decide a whole bunch of things later.
well, yeah,
But for right
yeah,
now,
but we're not.
let's
That's
focus
not.
on gravel
That's
pits.
not what we're trying to do. That's not what we're trying
Right.
to deal with here. But I guess the question about that you stated at least
so-
relates to gravel pits.
So in the beginning, if we decide to put this ordinance through, we should have just a little bit more restrictive than the county. And then as things move along over the years, we can get tighter and tighter and tighter as our restrictions are necessary, depending on land development, houses, public input, that sort of thing. But if we adopt an ordinance, we have to be just a little more restrictive than the county. We don't have to be as restrictive as Geneson.
It
Yeah,
can be
that's
more,
correct.
Correct.
Right.
Okay.
Right. No, I
So we
again,
don't need to adapt. We don't need to plagiarize. Plagiarize is a good word. Geneson's ordinances. We can come up with our own.
I think, Dan,
Right.
that the point of why we're, like, when most people talk about Geneson is they are our sister township and they emulate us the most closely. So, you know, if we're gonna look at something, one, they have a good one, you know, like their ordinance has worked well. I've talked to Lottie and Nate. Nate's the zoning officer, and they both have very good things to say about what they've written and how it's worked. Now, given, I do agree with you, we might not want to take everything they have to say. We can take their ordinance, plagiarize it, but cross out a few things that we don't like or add a few things that we want. This will be our own, but I think overall, you know, if they have a good thing and we say, yeah, we like this, it does not have to be 100% the same. It's not going to be. But I think the reason is because then it's bipartisan. Like, if they created this, we're not creating it specifically for our own self-interest. It's going to be something that we're taking from somebody else, so we don't have our own agenda on this, if that makes sense. So we're not trying to make our own one-sided theory of this. We're taking what somebody else drew, I don't even know how many years ago, and we're adapting most of that. So, and again, that's for the facts and findings to show, not for us to say we will do this 100%. We still have to do these whole reports and prove that yes, they have a better plan, or no, they don't. But I think that's where the time it takes to do the studies is important, and not just think about the future. We can't go that far yet, Dan. We're going one step at a time, I think. So, but you have some good points, but just not for this.
Greg?
Okay, also, Geneson is a double township. They are 72 square miles. We're only 36 square miles. We're more densely populated than Geneson in some ways. If you look at the plat maps of Geneson versus Friedenberg, St. Louis County puts out a plat map book, and you can compare land usage just by where people own property. Okay, it doesn't define the wetlands, it doesn't define those things, but you can see that Friedenberg is more densely populated. Somewhere back in the regulations, it said when townships were formed that they were supposed to keep 5 square miles of land open throughout the township, and our township is only got about 3 square miles of land that's open, and most of that resides between Fish Lake and the Cloquet River in the DNR areas. And then all the way up in the northwest corner of our lands in Friedenberg Township is a section of land that is totally undeveloped and left to wildlife. Does that make sense? We're beyond the point of no return with population, I think.
Yeah, that might come back into play. I made a note, Dan, when we look at whether it be the way they've partitioned their land to try to put some limits, or the way we've listed, I've seen in prior documentation, stress the amount of waterfront. I think your point of population density is an interesting one. I don't know how it's going to necessarily weave back in, but I think that's I'm going to be interested in looking at that a little more closely. That's intriguing. That's an intriguing comparison. Okay, want to keep moving, but is there any other questions on this one? Any
Greg?
questions for Bonnie or Bruce? Yes.
Melissa seems to be making a statement that we are going to formulate a zoning ordinance. I thought you said that was not what the object of this committee is, but to make a recommendation.
Right.
So let's make sure that we understand that our objective is not to develop an ordinance, if I
Correct.
understand it right.
No, that is the way I've interpreted what we've done at this point. Again, we've beat a dead horse. We're leaning quite heavily on Geneson and any other examples people bring forth. And I think some more people are looking further beyond Geneson for some of their material, which I support or welcome. Yeah, our recommendation may be to lean heavily on Geneson. It may not. I mean, again, I'm not trying to jump to conclusions, but yeah, we are not taking the effort to develop an ordinance. What I understand is we want to come to a reasonably quick point to be able to allot additional time to the township board to use our information and other sources to determine whether they would move in that direction. And if they were, then that would be a function of how the township awarded that work. We are not looking to assemble an ordinance as I understand it. But again, it's hard to people not to weave in the reference to ordinance, because it is literally there's the last word on the application we all filled out, use ordinance, and of course the references is between the county and the townships at this point. But I agree, Ed, we're not trying to write an ordinance, but we're drawing from ordinances as a means of comparison, and obviously looking to use that to make some form of recommendation. Well, let's go ahead and roll on to the next one. So turn the page of sorts. Barb and Jeff, financial assurances.
Okay. I'm going to start with Geneson Township. This is not a comparative deal. So under Geneson Township, pit owners shall not at any time have any delinquent taxes owed on the pit. All pit shall have a bond or other financial instrument of sufficient amount to cover costs of reclamation of the site. Under that, Planning Commission shall determine if financial assurance is sufficient. Financial assurance amounts shall be adjusted annually for inflation. All bonds shall be enforced from the beginning of the pit operation and renewed on an annual basis. All bonds must be a continuous certificate. The bond amount will be a minimum of $10,000. This amount can be increased to any amount as determined by the Planning Commission. Factors which affect the amount of the bond include the size of the pit, the estimate remaining years of life on the pit, and the scope of the operation. Township shall reserve the right to hold said bond until such time they are satisfied with all reclamation standards. Density of the borrow pit, conditional use permits for gravel pit operations will be issued in such a manner to minimize the cumulative impact for a specific area of the township. Fees for conventional use permits. In Genesee Township, new gravel pit conditional permits are $750 and they pay $150 annual renewal. And just as an example, in Lakewood Township, I have on my right up there, their pit, they charge $1,000 for the conditional use permit. St. Louis County doesn't have any kind of financial assurances, and their permits are $370. Now I'll get over into the Minnesota statutes. Aggregate material removal production tax. That's what's under the 298.75. Aggregate material means non-metallic, natural, mineral aggregate, including but not limited to sand, silica sand, gravel, crushed rock, limestone, granite, and borrow, but only if the borrow is transported on public roads, streets, or highways. Aggregate material must be measured or weighed after it has been extracted from the pit, quarry, or deposit. Tax imposed. This is an optional thing. A township that imposes the aggregate production tax shall impose upon every operator a production tax of 21.5 cents per cubic yard or 15 cents per ton of aggregate material excavated in the township, except the township board may decide not to impose this tax if it is determined that in the previous year, operators removed less than 20,000 tons or 14,000 cubic yards of aggregate material from the township. State law sets the above tax rate, and we do not have the discretion to set a lower rate. The tax shall not be imposed on aggregate material excavated in the township until the aggregate material is transported from the extraction site or sold, whichever occurs first. When aggregate material is stored in a stockpile within the state of Minnesota and a highway, road, or street is not used for transporting the aggregate material, the tax shall not be imposed until either when the aggregate material is sold or when it is transported from the stockpile site or when it is used from the stockpile, whichever is first. The township that receives revenue from this tax is prohibited from imposing any additional host community fees on aggregate production within the township. Proceeds from the tax. State law specifies how the revenue from the tax are to be used. Proceeds from these taxes shall go to the general fund of the township to be expended for maintenance, construction, and reconstruction of roads, highways, and bridges. And just on another note, the only township in the state of Minnesota that collects this tax is Solway Township.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Again, I'll take a cut at it. You make mention of reclamation up front, and part of the reasoning behind the financial assurances. Again, I think we're going to see this. It's been stressed in the examples I've seen where reclamation, whether it's the reference that was made prior, that is the intent to put constraints on new pits in order to encourage people to reclaim old pits, or whether it be the monitoring and adherence and so forth. It does seem as though Genesee and maybe other townships are looking closely at that, where the county is kind of on the front end of the process, but I don't think they're necessarily that attentive to the downstream part of the process. And I think because we are talking about tying it to sufficient to protect the interests of the residents, clearly reclaimed land can be repurposed and actually can be beneficial for any number of reasons. I know others, Dan in particular, has shared, or maybe I've heard it from others, where there's pits that have been reclaimed, like where our current fire hall is, and that's a good thing to see have happened. And maybe that's a really important discovery in this, is just ensuring those pits are reclaimed so that we can tidy up the environment a bit. You mentioned Lakewood Township. Did you have other material, Jeff? I didn't see that come across. Is that something you just happened to research?
I just wanted to pull up and see what permit costs were, I pulled up that township. So that's all I was trying to do on that.
Okay.
I didn't go through and research all of their, reclamation, bonding. I didn't go through and do all that. I just wanted to see. I tried to look at a couple other ones, and it didn't have it out there as clear on what the permit was. So I just wanted to give an idea on what another township did charge for the permits.
Okay, appreciate that. And then you referenced Soloway, and I'm just going to call it out here because I recollect. Ed, did you say, Ed Press, did you say that you were in contact with them? That would be an interesting thing to maybe know more about, of how they've applied that, and what the basis or the logic behind that was, and how that's fared for them.
To be honest, Greg, after Clay basically said that Solway is not comparable, I pretty much have dropped them.
Yeah, I think, well, I recall something being mentioned before. I don't recollect again. It was just an exchange of comments. But just as, Jeff has dug a little deeper with Lakewood, I think the more examples that are pertinent to what we're trying to accomplish, the better. And in this case, if that is the only township that has taken on this, because again, we're going to spill into the issues around economics at one point or another. I guess that would be an interesting to understand why others haven't, and maybe there's good reason for, or why Solway has. So I guess that can resurface later. I just thought that was an interesting comment that Jeff had shared.
Greg, just as a side note, in the last 10 years, if I go back to 2010, the only other township in St. Louis County that did was Midway, and they stopped collecting the tax in 2013.
At what? In 2013?
13. But their tax in 2013 was $2,200, whereas Solway in 2008 was almost $58,000.
And what year was that for Solway?
So Solway was the material only goes out, that you can get from Minnesota Revenue is the last year is 2018.
Okay, and that's in year 2019. Oh, 2018, excuse me, it was 58K. Okay, yeah. Again, I like the objective facts and figures, even if it's just of general benefit here. This is allowed within the statute. It's only been done by 2 townships that you've been able to come across. They're kind of within our area. I've been through Solway, and every the soccer games, they have some pretty big pits there. And I guess that gives us a sense of how big is big or not. So
one other thing, Grand Lake did charge the tax in 2001 and 2002.
Okay.
But those are the I mean, there's a township in one of the townships is in Otter Tail, but there was only 3 townships in St. Louis County, the 3 that we're talking about here, that do or have charged this tax.
Okay.
So I wanted to, if anyone goes to the shared drive and looks at number 24 is kind of probably where the information you're getting from, Jeff.
Yes.
And what to clarify though is there are quite a few counties that are getting aggregate tax. So, and St. Louis County is not one of them. So Yes, there are only a few, one currently township in Minnesota. There are quite a few counties in Minnesota that are taking aggregate tax. So just to clarify that, and that's number 24 on that shared drive, if you guys want to look at it,
But also just to, on that is, I believe it's in there that if a county does charge us tax, then the township, I mean, you can't have the two. So that might be why you don't have more townships, because there's a whole list of counties that have it.
Good point.
Because
Well, I think we'll be.
The way that it works is this: the county charges the tax. Let's just hypothetically say that St. Louis County charged the tax, and we have these pits in Friedenberg. We would get 42.5%. Friedenberg would get 42.5% of that. St. Louis County would get 42.5% of that tax, and 15% of that tax will go into a reserve for reclamation of pits. If the county charged it.
This is Clay Sitchin. I spoke with a representative from Solway Township on December 7th, 20. And there are 13 townships in the state of Minnesota as far as he knew, that did charge the tax. This began back in 1997, and he actually was one of the persons who testified down at in St. Paul about the tax. So they've been in the tax business since 1997, and they have approximately 7 pits in Solway Township, and not many people live there. So that was the one thing that Ron did point out. So hopefully that sheds some light.
Thanks for sharing that, Clay. I don't want to jump the gun, but Mark McShay, are you on? I know Lynn's on. Maybe Mark's not.
I'm here.
Okay.
I'm here.
You're here. Okay.
It took me a while.
Yeah, get to the mute button. Well, we'll let Deborah speak, but as I have under number 4, I know there's been a comment and a request to go back to the application in the last page of it. So we'll wait on that. But I know that you had voiced prior, and I have a perspective that looking into the financial aspects as well. But Barb and Jeff, anything else on your portion, or any other comments or questions from the group on this financial assurances at this point? Okay. If not, we'll move on to the comprehensive plan. Deborah.
Okay. And I kind of, I couldn't see a way to combine these well together. You'll hear a lot of similarities, but I tried to hit the highlights that I thought were there. Friedenberg Township's land area is 25.4 square miles, of which 10.5 square miles is water. Over a third of the land in Friedenberg is covered by water. The Friedenberg identity, quotes, we're located in the next tier of townships out from Duluth. We need to guide the future development to retain the character, and areas unsuitable for development need to be protected. The people that worked on it, Mr. McShane, you were on that, said they need to recognize value and preserve natural resources, lakes, rivers, streams, and wetlands that act as filters. The goals and policies in the Friedenberg Township state goal 1 was relevant to this, and it's about maintaining existing character. Policy 2 under that, rural areas away from development should generally be used for that area's dominant land use activity, such as farming and forestry. And that was specifically mentioned in there. Goal 2, preserve the high quality of the natural environment. Policy 2, preserve all significant wetlands for wildlife and hydrological systems. And policy 6, encourage unsightly properties to restore lands to aesthetically pleasing and healthful condition possibly through the adoption of local ordinances. Goal 6 in the Friedenberg Township Plan was to encourage residents and other interested parties to participate in land use and development decisions, what we're doing here. The plan concepts say a specific course of action to be followed by the county to accomplish goals and policies of township, intended to resolve land use issues and prevent conflicts in the future. When revision is necessary, these concepts and planning process serve as the model. Concept 3, lake and stream designations shall be consistent with or more restrictive than DNR classification. Shoreland development standards shall be enforced, especially maintaining natural shoreland within the shoreland impact zone. Establishment of new buffer strips and maintenance of existing ones should be high priority. The township has more lakeshore frontage than any other township surrounding Duluth. That seemed very significant. Development pressures must be addressed in a conscientious manner. Care should be exercised to inventory environmentally sensitive areas. Implementing zone districts should reflect these. So concept 5 was fragile lands, especially those that relate to the hydrological system of the township, should be inventoried and protected from potential side effects of development. B, the natural resource areas should also be identified and prioritized and protected from incompatible development. And C, natural drainage patterns should be protected. Allow wetlands to follow natural drainage courses. Under the St. Louis County Comprehensive Land Use Plan, you'll hear some similarities here, but they do it differently. The county is to use gap analysis to protect natural resources during review of development proposals through sequencing. For example, first by avoiding impacts to natural features, then minimizing impacts, and then mitigating impacts. So under their natural environmental goals, objectives, and implementation, any one, they want to strive for local decision-making that balances social, economic, and environmental concerns. 1.1 under that is county policies and approvals related to land use, development, and management will address current needs without compromising the ability to meet future needs. 1.2, county operations, land use, and management will be more efficient and environmentally responsible. Any 2, water resources will be protected. 2.1 is policies will protect surface waters and groundwater. Any 3, county will promote responsible stewardship of natural resources. Effectively advance natural resources goals and better manage sensitive natural areas. They have future land maps and I copied those. I made multiple copies in colors so that they could be used by the town board members as well. Are we gonna pull that up now?
Let's see. Paul, can you do that right now? I'll text Paul and ask him.
Okay, yeah, so if you guys can see this, the county says this guides all changes to zoning. The map defines land use categories. And well, it's pretty significant the way that they have Friedenberg mapped out. So that's why I think it's really important for you all to see this. And Paul had said he'd pull it up.
Okay, all right, thanks. He's looking it up right now. I just emailed it to him, so
okay,
he's getting it out from the email.
Yeah, I think this is pretty critical to what's coming up here. And I did star some of these things that I thought were ultra critical. There we go. Okay, can we see okay, that one has the I'm blanking. I got up really early this morning. Okay, there's the one that I was really interested in. Okay, so the orange, that's Friedenberg, that square in the middle. The orange, they define as lakeshore development areas. Now, as you can see, that's the vast majority of our township. So lakeshore development areas are seen as orange on maps, intended for rural development, may include uses of the size, scale, and intensity consistent with the county's developed lakeshore lots, primarily single-family residential, convenience store and fuel service, restaurant, small-scale tourist service, specialty shops for fishing, hunting, etc., B&Bs, hotel motels, campgrounds, and tourist services. Flexibility for home occupations and isolated small businesses. Intergovernmental coordination. The continued use of land maps. Townships may continue to use their own land use plans in the planning and zoning process. So under the county and township planning coordination, townships continue to maintain an integral role in planning application review process. County staff will continue to request a recommendation from the local township board on all subdivision rezoning, variance, and conditional use permit applications. Township board recommendations will be considered in staff report. Okay, goal LU3, improve integrity of county planning related regulations. LU 12.5, ensure that the path for townships to administer or relinquish zoning authority from the county is clearly identified. Organized townships may obtain their own zoning jurisdiction. LU 8, evaluate the existing setback distance between borrow pits and adjoining property boundaries. Amend the setback if necessary. LU 0.28, for all applications, ensure that grading and site plans will preserve as many natural features as possible. And LU 0.32, review county extractive use reclamation plan standards pertaining to site cleanup, grading of site after closure, native revegetation, etc. Develop an annual compliance inspection program of general purpose pits. So then ARDC kind of wrapped this up, and in their report, these are some of the things they said. They said the relevant existing town plan goals and strategies. Goal 3, provide for the orderly growth of commercial and industrial activities within the township. Policy 2 is new commercial or industrial development will be compatible with character and environment of the township through site design controls, screening between incompatible uses, and nodalization of industrial uses. Policy 4, discourage heavy industrial and large commercial expansion as incompatible with township character and environment. Then they go on to specifically discuss borrow pit gravel mining overview. While a critical operation for development, gravel mining and similar processing plants inherently create additional noise, potential air contaminants, and large truck traffic within proximity of the site. These impacts should be required to be mitigated, but also put additional pressure on siting to minimize conflicts with non-compatible uses. While the extent of non-term environmental impacts is not fully understood, rehabilitation of pits and plants can mitigate potential negative environmental impacts drastically. Additionally, rehabilitation can lead to a public amenity, i.e. recreation areas or new wetlands. And the history of local zoning control under that portion, local zoning control and legal precedents of regulation. Townships can adopt land use ordinance no different than counties or cities. Town zoning is under the same statute as cities. Towns ordinances need to be consistent with the county. as restrictive or more restrictive, but not less restrictive. Towns are not required to do all or nothing zoning. Local governments regulate only what they choose. Many towns adopt a limited ordinance like that, regulating only the few issues they feel are not adequately governed by the county ordinance. The town enforces and administers its own ordinance, and the county ordinances, if any apply, exist in parallel with towns. An applicant would need to apply to both local governments and get approvals from both. So in the public input summary from ARDC at the public hearing on July 29th, that was held via Zoom, there were many concerns listed. I didn't list them all by the residents. In the community survey, 52% supported a local zoning ordinance. And so their final recommendations were option 1, no change to ordinance. Option 2, the township adopts an ordinance regulating borrow pits. And option 3, prohibit borrow pits.
Greg, are you talking?
Yeah, get off mute would help, right?
Yeah,
Sorry
yeah.
about that.
Oh,
Thanks. You guys are really patient there. Yeah, what I was going to say is I've got just a couple of things kind of consistent with the prior. I just make mention to start off. The biggest one is, again, stressing the basis of the this review and recommendations as to how these permits are considered. And of course, what I believe is the most objective component within both Geneson and within the county, is a reference to the conforms to the land use of the comprehensive plan. It happens to be the comprehensive plan clearly for the county is the county's comprehensive plan, whereas Geneson has their own comprehensive plan. So it's the basis of which plan is being referred to. Now, in light of the work that's gone in, I had heard it, and Mark, you were one that mentioned, I think, that there had been a lot of effort put into the Friedenberg comprehensive plan, land use comprehensive plan, and yet that wasn't brought to bear on necessarily the decision on the most recent site. And I would assume if we stayed with being under the county's ordinance again, it would not necessarily comprehend or would not necessarily be based on the planning work done within the township itself. Is that a fair statement? Mark, are you
I
on?
think he's muted.
Well, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, I think what has happened, we've gone into a transition from, I don't want to say that our comprehensive land use plan was the governing plan, but it had more influence when the county decided to implement a template that is an umbrella over all of the townships. Basically, they diminished the impact and the review of our comprehensive plan and our goals and missions for our community. So it does not carry the same weight now that it did prior to the most recent change in the counties administering a consistent plan for all townships, so I don't know if that answers your question.
I mean, that's helpful. Appreciate that. So, and that kind of fits in my mind then, that if as we continue forward, if there is a thought that there is value in having township oversight we would have to, as part of an effort, revisit our comprehensive plan to make sure it's current. Is that, and, or if we weren't to make that recommendation, then I guess it doesn't matter because it's not being taken into account by the county directly at this point anyways.
Greg, can I ask Deb Polowitz or Deb, do you recall, it seems to me that the county said that they wouldn't accept our comprehensive plan, but I was told by an attorney, I believe, that that is not the county's right.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I'll give you a little history first of all. Before our committee got together a few years back to update the comprehensive land use plan, there was a lot of effort put in by several individuals prior. And we found out, or I found out in my research when I was looking into this, that the township at that time never submitted the one they worked so hard on to the county. It was just left laying on a desk and it never made it there. So when I found that out, I volunteered to get a committee together, and we went back and redid and resubmitted the work that the first group did. That being said, several years have passed in between the two, and the county then had come up with their umbrella plan that covers everyone in all the townships. And they said they would take ours in and they would use it for reference, but they could not have it adopted because they have their own plan that umbrellas everybody. Does that make sense?
Well, that's what they said.
That's what they said. And they said that they were supposed to use ours as to look at it as what our township wishes are. And they're supposed to follow that or try to follow that, and they are not. That makes sense?
This is Clay Sitch. And I had a phone meeting with the chair from Kenosha Township 2 days ago, and we discussed their comprehensive plan and how the county accepted theirs in 2019. So they have say over what goes on in their township. So they did not give up all of their authority when they asked the county to come in and manage it for a time for them. Believe it or not, their biggest worry right now is to be annexed by somebody, which I found to be quite curious. But I had a 36-minute conversation with Kevin Kompnick, and he's been on the town board for Kenosha for 13 years. So, and he was most interested to see how we were doing because he has had some of the same difficulties that we have had with the county, but he has managed his way through it. But I will talk to him again to clarify any of these questions that have come up this evening. And they just recently had 2 gravel pits that were built in the last few years, one more recently this year. And I asked them how close they were to any of the, major areas where people live in the township. And he says there's nobody around them. So if that helps you at all. So they do have sway, or they certainly have the decision to make these kinds of decisions with the township, and it is recognized by the county. As Debbie has said.
Yeah. Thanks, Clay. Ed Pretz had shared the kind of reference to some level of collaboration, and again, we maybe heard outside of this forum that, and we've had a reason with Keith Nelson coming and kind of sharing his perspective that I don't think there's a huge level of confidence in trusting in the county unless there's some level of detail around how our plan is taken into account or how our input is taken into account. But again, just the reference back to Ganesen, they are directly utilizing their own comprehensive plan. And I guess to Deb's comment and to your comment, it doesn't sound like the county has any obligation to abide by what we may determine. So at least relative to borrow pits may be the best example here. So if we put forth the effort to have a plan in place, it's not really, doesn't sound like it's necessarily being applied directly, because the county still has the opportunity to forego taking it as seriously as we might have intended and make a decision based on their own umbrella plan. So it seems like a little bit of a gap in how we can go back to and ensure we look after the interests of our residents if it really rolls back to the county. Excuse me, to the county.
Greg?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just a couple of more comments on a historical basis. And Deb, correct me if I'm wrong on this. The county required that we updated our comprehensive plan at a certain frequency. Not often, there's a number of times when revisions were made to our comprehensive plan over time. Those were submitted to the county and had to go to the board for board approval. And so that process was in place. Our comp plan carried a lot more weight than where we're at today. And so part of the reason why it was so urgent, Deb mentioned that another group had gone through the entire process, but they didn't achieve the update and submittal in a timely fashion. We got it extended, and then we completed it using what they had done and added on to that. And this is before, more recently, when the county implemented their program. So there had been a process in place. It did carry much more weight. I wouldn't say it was 100% governing, but it did carry much more weight. And the process enabled changes as our community evolved, as development occurred, as the population increased. And so those things did occur. It is not the same now as it was during that timeline. Okay.
Yeah, appreciate it. I know you had shared you and Deb both have some depth of knowledge, which we may need to draw back on. So I appreciate both sharing. I'm going to hit one more time because it really struck me that when I saw the way the county addressed the application for the CUP and brought forth information in their staff report, and quite frankly stressed facts, that there was a lack of facts being provided as an alternative or, what have you, that again, it was my takeaway. The only thing they could hang their hat on was the comprehensive plan the county had, the fact that it was zoned for the land and the one that we're, currently that spawned this discussion, that it had legitimacy the way it was zoned. The rest of it was all subjective. I saw little or no facts, which is again why I stressed earlier. I like what I see with Ganesen, that they bring forth metrics that make it more objective and more specific. So all parties, both the pit as well as the residents, have a clear understanding of what to expect. So when the strongest basis, the dominant basis that I saw the county making a decision on was their plan, not our plan, and I didn't have the history. It seemed as though the work that had been done or the interests of our township were being overlooked. So this is my takeaway. So again, if we have a comprehensive plan, or if we have an ordinance, ultimately sounds like we need to have a comprehensive plan revisited, because it's one of the criteria that all people draw from, but it would be our township comprehensive plan, not the county. So
I'm just going to piggyback on some of the stuff. Looking at LU 32 that Deb has talked about, basically they say they're going to develop an annual compliance inspection program for general purpose pits. I got all the documents from the county. They're actually on the shared drive for you guys to look at. They're a mess. They're not in order or anything else, but the last inspection that was ever done in any of the pits is in 2008. And some of those pits have compliance concerns, some of them major compliance concerns, and that was it. So the fact that they themselves say they're going to do an annual compliance inspection And 2008 was the last time they did it. I think that is a point of concern why enforcement is so important, because they're not, well, we have many facts. They don't do what they say themselves. But what Deb brought up, this is just one of the examples that would have helped us with reclamation and everything else in our township had they followed their own rules. So just wanted to state that as something that the facts and findings you'll find in the shared documents. You can look at that, and the last time they did anything was in 2008, and they marked things and never fixed them. So.
Yeah, I think appreciate that, Melissa. I think you said you're going to go through that and identify more thoroughly that, you know, what was the situation relative to the different pits and the conditions. Yeah, I mean, we've got the reclamation on the latter part of the process that we're seeing more detail around, which I think is healthy. Repurposing the land, we see more detail around the obligations of the operators, which is intended to protect the community to a greater extent. And they were seeing some things I think are more objective on the front end with the application process. So not that there's clarity here in my mind yet, because I'm still trying to catch up. But yeah, there's multiple categories of how that information might help the township or bring clarity to the differences between the county and the township. So good information. Anything else for Deborah? Otherwise, we're almost at 8 o'clock, strike of the hour. I do have a couple more things I want to go through on the agenda. Make sure we cover them at least a bit here. Okay. If not, let's go ahead and just switch on down to number 4. I'd already, kind of pitch something to Mark. And of course, Lynn had brought this up too last call, and that is there is a third page within the application that we were involved in. It has reference to the ADRC study. Again, you've heard people reference that, the most recent one, Deb, on her comments. And there is one category that is somewhat unique. And Mark, did you want to just mention your thoughts around the administration and costs as a possible additional segment that we want to detail out? Or Lynn, I think you're both been in conversation on this.
Yeah, I'm unmuted again. Sure, I can comment on that. Yeah, it was something that Lynn had brought up about the financials, something that I've also thought was critical or important as a factor in any decision-making project. When I looked at the application, I looked at, what was provided and the information. And when the matrix was developed, the area of the, administration and cost, revenue expense associated with taking on this type of initiative wasn't included. There's bits and pieces of it in there. And so I had some discussions with some of the folks after Lynn had brought it up and I had piggybacked onto it. And so there is obviously a benefit in listening to some of the comments and some of the areas that are being discussed. Greg, you mentioned about, we seem to be looking extensively at Gnesen and maybe we can look beyond that a little bit to see what other info might be of benefit. Part of what our small subgroup has been doing is pulling together a questionnaire for 4 townships, as an example. It could be whatever number, but it's a template that would ask the same questions of all of the townships. And just to give you kind of a feel for some of the things that you were mentioning or the different people were mentioning, one of the questions is something like, do you charge an extraction tax or a fee? How much and for what quantities? And if not, what were the primary factors in your decision not to? It talks about, do you perform follow-up inspections to verify compliance? What is the frequency and who has the responsibility? If there is no compliance, if there is non-compliance, who does enforcement? What are the average estimated costs that you've incurred to facilitate enforcement? And generally, what have the staff demands and impact been? So, there are the revenue sides and cost sides, but also there's the staff resource sides. How do you administer, the process itself? So what positions are used to support the process, for the COPs, and what are the associated costs? And do you do any contract services? Some of the townships, I believe, contract out on a part-time basis, building coordinator or building official positions. So pulling together the information and comparing it between multiple townships may give us a, kind of a good indication what to expect on some of the revenue and expense side and why they chose to make the decisions they did. And so it'll help, at least have something to, I guess, have a broader picture of financial impact on, the budget of Friedenberg Township and the citizens. So, that's just kind of a real quick overview. Where we're at, we're basically at a point where we've made contact with 4 townships. They are aware that we're going to be requesting some assistance in this matter. It's interesting because they all seem to know about what is happening in Friedenberg Township. Obviously there've been other people reaching out to the different townships, so it's not a surprise that we have some questions. But what we're trying to do is assemble the questions in a fashion that are fairly easy to respond to and have explicit responses as best we can, and maybe gather some of their history and decision-making steps and outcomes. So, that's basically where we're at. We're at a point of moving forward with finalizing on a township questionnaire template and then sending it off to the different townships. So I'm not sure what else you want, or if you have some questions about that, or
What townships are you doing, Mark?
we're looking at Gneeson, Duluth, Lakewood, and Midway.
Could I make a comment here? This is Clay Sitch.
Sure.
I actually spent a day and a half contacting 9 different counties. Anoka County,
counties?
Beltrami.
Counties or
actual counties?
Okay. Counties. Okay.
The question I posed to them was, do you share your zoning? Well, Anoka Township doesn't do any zoning. They share it with everybody. The only thing they kept was waterfront. The only county of the 9 that I did contact was Aiken County, and they have no townships that do any kind of zoning on their own, but all the rest of them. And I think that I spoke to an attorney from the Minnesota Association of Townships, and he had indicated that we're talking about 80% of all counties share zoning in the state of Minnesota. So this is not uncommon.
Right. Yeah, but Clay, that sounds like that goes to part of the pushback that seemed to be reflected in Keith Nelson or the county talking about take all or nothing.
That would be correct.
Where what Mark I think is sharing is there's information. Well, there's actually a reference on that 3rd page of administration and costs, which is a logical additional component in my mind beyond the framework of the comparison of the actual ordinances, that getting some insight, sharing with the team, and the way you walk through some of the questionnaire, Mark, I think some of those fall into other categories where people might have a primary interest. So I don't know if, we're not trying to be overly structured here, right? We're not employed. Nobody reports to anybody else. So I don't know if you want to share the questionnaire to see if other people might have something that they're believing could be added without overwhelming the process, and then having that go out so it provides kind of a broader net, or if you just want to move forward independently and then bring the information back and see if there's anything else. But
the only reference I wanted to make was that this was not uncommon to share zoning with the county. That was the only reason I made all the calls and talked to all of the county representatives.
Right.
So
just to close that out, Clay. I think that's good validation of what position I think the township was taking with the county, where the county was not really acknowledging it, from what I could read prior. So it sounds like you've refuted that in light of the research you've done, which is good, because we're talking about just that, only taking on one aspect, if in fact we do that or make that recommendation. So go ahead, Mark.
Just to respond to you, yeah, I realize that there would be some redundancy or some duplication to a certain extent, but it's hard to, again, just trying to capture the revenue expense, the administration and costs. It also encompasses, staffing impact and some things like that within this questionnaire to get a feel for what might occur, how much is handled in-house versus contracted out. And so, yeah, there is, I realize there is some duplication or redundancy. I don't think there's a lot. And I think these are more specific to the financials, versus, some of the data and comparisons that are being done between Geneson, Friedenberg, and the county. This is expanding it to other townships. So part of it is, drawing consistently the same information from all of them to compare. And it gets into the CUPs and costs associated with that. I must have been getting a little bit tired because I said, how much is your application and our CUP fee? And is there, and I forgot to put the U in annual, so is there an annual renewal fee? So I was getting tired when I got to that point in the process. So.
Okay. Well, again, having revisited the third page of the application, it is included as part of what it was, the overall intent, and I do think most things benefit by having a financial perspective overlaid with other aspects. So I'm interested in seeing what you do get back, the effort that you and Lynn are putting towards that.
Greg, can I add one more thing?
Sure.
I did add to the shared drive. I went back on the meeting minutes, and from 2015 on, I just put like every year what the finances were, like what we have in our bank account for the township. And we have a lot of money. So, when we are looking at these finances, I think one thing that's important to acknowledge is the counties did such a horrible job in their enforcement that I think the first few years, I think we're all going to agree, are going to be expensive to fix. But I did talk to Nathan, he's the zoning officer from Geneson, and he agreed with that. But he said his whole paycheck from Geneson, he's a zoning officer, was $5,000. He said, and gravel pits was a small part of that. He goes, honestly, I don't see this being an issue at all. But I mean, we really need to look at, any good business, like if you're a business owner, which many of you guys are, any good business puts a lot of money into high quality, good startup, you're not going to cheap out on stuff because that's not where you want to go. So upfront cost will be a good benefit. And I think that's part of what we need to also look at. Because I don't think there's any disputing that there will be some extreme costs to start. But once everything settles down, once enforcement administration is running smoothly, I think the cost will greatly depreciate. And things will come together. So Mark, if you want to put that together also, I think those are some things to really look at kind of from a business perspective. So that's just my point. And also just looking at how much money we have, we're not exactly going broke in our township. So
well, you have to, can I butt in here, Melissa? You have to remember though, that when you were talking to the Geneson guy and you're talking about zoning and how much money's coming in through the zoning, that includes all of zoning, not just a little portion of it.
Yeah, he said $5,000, is my whole, like, he goes, that's probably what I got all last year. And he goes, and Geneson and gravel pits was only a small amount. So he goes, that it really hardly anything, really once now that we're running with it, he goes, most of what I do is like the buildings, the homes, different things. So yeah, you're right. I mean, so $5,000 was a high amount, so that's, because he couldn't say exactly what gravel pit was for his zoning part. But it's not that bad for a whole year. Anyways, that's more what I meant. So I agree with you, Lynn. That wasn't an accurate statement, but it's more, we can handle it little bit.
This is Deb. I would just want to interject one thing too, because I did talk extensively with the Gneeson folks over there. And I asked them straight up, so the cost, how is that affecting you over there? And is it expensive? And they said, you know, like Melissa just said, the startup, it was a little rough, you know, because they had some issues that they had to get cleaned up. But when you do your conditional use permits, you put some teeth in them, and the operators are going to abide by them, because if they don't, they have the option to shut them down. They don't want to be shut down. They want to keep going. So everybody abides by the rules. They take care of themselves, and it's a very pleasant work atmosphere over there now. But,
okay, the other thing you guys, can I speak on that? The other thing you guys have to remember, the whole group here, is that there's some people, maybe possibly in the township, that want to do a gravel pit and don't have like all this money for these fees and for all of that. So how do you guys propose to deal with that?
is it a pit for sale? I mean, if it's a borough pit and you're selling gravel, I'm sure that the fees will be covered in the cost of your the gravel that's being sold. I mean, it's not a, you're gonna get this because it's a favor. It's all across the board. It would have to be what you pay, they pay, I pay, everybody pays. You can't have favoritism. That's when trouble happens.
That's not what I'm, okay, now I'm talking not on the perspective, the financial side, as far as the town board goes. I'm talking about the financial side of someone, say anywhere in the township, that wants to open a gravel pit. Now you guys are gonna tax them, you're gonna bond them. So you're taking all these little people and telling them to basically, you can't open a pit because you can't afford it.
Well, Lynn, those are good points that probably get talked further as we work through this, but nobody's recommending we tax, and nobody's recommending a level of bonding, even though there's been a variance, I think, reflected if we go back to the numbers. But I hear what you're saying, that there might be smaller operators that the charges need to be commensurate with maybe the level of the operation. But I will anchor back to the primary push that was reflected, and that is to look after whether the regulations are sufficiently protecting the residents. And, you know, the residents pay taxes, the residents have property ownership. You know, we are in America where the largest investment we make often is in our home. So I don't know how far we're going to get into the financials of this. Again, we're scratching the surface with Jeff pulled together based on his initial report. You and Mark are, you, Lynn and Mark are looking at drawing some additional information, which I think is going to be very insightful. And we haven't even talked about the impact to the value of the residents in adjoining properties. And I'm not sure how we're going to weave that in, but there's definitely going to have to be something that touches on a couple of different aspects of dollars and cents, costs or otherwise. So I'm eager to see what comes of your draw of information from the 4 townships you mentioned. That's a great initiative you and Mark are taking on. And we probably have to talk further about how we're going to look at any other aspects that have a financial side to it. But there's a resident side as well as the pit operator side. And we want to have the balanced view. You know, we want to have an enlightened perspective in light of the information we're drawing. So I'm eager to be part of that discovery process.
If I may, Greg, one last comment. You know, what Melissa said is very valid. You know, often there are, you know, this process in itself is proof of that. There are upfront costs to work through these types of issues. I think some of what will be generated from what we're reviewing on the financial is kind of the ongoing experience, the historical experience for the most recent history of what they're experiencing. It's not going to be focused on, you know, like the startup business type of a thing as much, but that is very valid. And we're experiencing those costs right now. And the points made by Deb and Lynn are valid as well. And of course, with Greg, absolutely. Anybody who is in proximity to commercial industrial expansion will feel the impact in some form or fashion, quality of life or financial value, you know, that type of thing. So all valid items that it's hard to get a handle on everything that we're trying to grasp and evaluate. So go ahead, move on, Greg.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Well, many of may have heard the term storming, norming, and performing, and that is so it sounds overly formalized, but that is how teams work. They storm, they norm, and then they perform. And so we're working somewhere between storming, lean to performing, or storming, lean, and norming. Performing is really the product, efforts towards a product. So we've got some work to do there. Again, I appreciate everybody's perspective. I truly do. I'm learning a lot, and the efforts that people are taking to pursue additional information. Again, as long as you bring it back and make it relevant to what we're doing is nothing but helpful. So appreciate it. Well, what I'm going to do on that last item is I'll work with Melissa. We'll add a ninth segment just to expand the matrix. It will relate to, this aspect of administration and costs. We'll see what the initial feedback we get back from Mark and Lynn is. I would assume in light of the survey going out, you're probably not going to be ready by Monday. That's unrealistic, but we do have segment 3, 5, 6, and 7 that hopefully we can have a good portion of those made available, and then have those people share those come our next meeting, which will conclude, I think, our gatherings for the year. So that's kind of what I envision to be the next step. Just jumping to housekeeping, try to wrap it up here. We're almost on 2 hours. Again, I encourage, I might have misstated in a prior document about sending information to Melissa. Quite frankly, if you come across information you think is of value to the team, please send it directly. That may be a little bit, maybe a little oversubscribed on inbound messaging by that being the case, but we can personally screen that information. I don't want anybody to perceive they're being censored or that we're limiting input because it is a team activity. Everybody's volunteered for this. Everybody has an equal voice. So please just distribute that directly, and then as that or if that becomes pertinent, we're going to have to make sure we grab that and post on the share drive for future reference. With that, I'll open it to the team group here if there's anything else that they want to bring up before we conclude. Not hearing a motion to adjourn the meeting. Second.
Second it.
Thank you, Patty. All in favor? Aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, meeting's concluded. We will be back on next Monday, and the agenda will be sent out in advance. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Aye.
Yep, good night.
Aye.